All right, guys, we got the Fummins here. We got the open trailer hooked up. We are heading to pick up a new car. So I haven't actually seen the car yet. I literally had it shipped directly to AJ's shop to get a cage put in it, and he finished up the cage and we're going to pick it up from him. So this is going to be my first time seeing it, period, and I'm going to get to see it with the cage. I put my radar detector in. There's a cop up here and I don't know how fast I'm going. 35 is the speed limit. So yeah, I'm real curious to see it. I'll have to explain better what this car is for and why, but I'm pretty excited to go pick this thing up and see how it looks. So we should be there soon. We're like 1 mile away, so we'll pick this back up when we get there. All right, we made it out here to Bell Raceworks, AJ's shop. Got the cage. So I am super excited about this. I'm curious to compare it to the cage that's in the other car, but just looking at it from memory, there's so much more room. So this car, obviously, is a Corvette, another Corvette. I'll explain later. But this is a steel chassis car. So the other car is a Z06 aluminum chassis, which makes caging it very weird and complicated. However, this car being a steel chassis, you can just build the cage to the frame. So this one's out of 1.5-inch tubing. It's so much sleeker than the other one. The other one has a bunch of extra stuff too, but just in general, there's a lot more room everywhere. So we still got to do some gutting. We don't need any of this stuff. We don't need any of this wiring. We'll probably take this bar out. The front's been cut off. We're gonna put a bash bar on it anyway. It's still got the stock pedal box. It hasn't been all cut up like the other cars, so we have a lot more options on how we wanna build it out, what we wanna do with it. So this one's still got the stock column set up, stock pedal box in it. It was a manual car. It was a Grand Sport, actually, which is kind of cool. Doesn't really matter for where the car is at right now, but still cool. We need to get this thing loaded up, get it home, and start stripping it down the rest of the way, painting, and we got work to do. Are we over the fender?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Oh yeah, we're doing good. And a little further. Nothing there, try there. You're pretty much all the way in. All right, we got the car home. Left it in here on the trailer because I'm not quite ready for it to take over the garage. The Safiro's still got a little bit of work to do, and it is gonna be a debacle getting this thing off the trailer with no suspension on it. Always is. If you ever loaded and unloaded a chassis with no suspension, it is a struggle. So some things I noticed on the cage, just some nice features I wanna point out real quick. One, just the fit up, man. AJ absolutely killed it on this cage. Like, it could not fit tighter. Look at how tight, look how perfect that A-pillar bar is. It could not go any further over. He did a stellar job on this cage. I can't thank AJ enough for getting this on schedule and in and done so fast. That man rockets out cages like, I think he said he had done 6 in the last 2 months, which if you know how long it takes to build a cage, like that's insane. Like he got this thing done in a few days. It's absurd. So luckily he was able to, because we need this thing. So you might be wondering, what is this car for? Well, it's a 2013 Grand Sport, so it's a steel chassis car, and this is going to be the replacement for our aluminum chassis Z06 shell here we've got that we were building. Now, you might be like, Taylor, what? You've gone off the deep end. You've lost your mind this time. I can't, you know, you got the car, you could have just finished it, you started diving in and changing stuff, I was with you. You pulled the motor out, you started taking pretty much everything out, wanting to redo everything. I was on the fence, but I was with you. But you're building a whole nother car? You're completely getting rid of the chassis and switching to another chassis? Like, that makes no sense. You've lost your mind. I'm not with you anymore. Okay, well, let me explain. There's a good reason. So, as we dug deeper and deeper into this thing, which is why we dug deeper and deeper into it instead of just finishing it up as it was, because again, this is a competition car. This car absolutely has to perform. If it's not, we're wasting a lot of time and money going to a competition if the car doesn't work. So that's why we've done our due diligence and why we're pretty much redoing everything. And in that process, we found a couple major problems. That was kind of the tipping point to try to make this move. So as we were looking in here, the chassis has been heavily modified. Someone has reskinned the floors with aluminum. I guess the Z06s normally have like a balsa wood core floor. So someone took the time to TIG weld in an 1/8 inch piece of aluminum plate and then brace it with all this strapping and double up on the seat mount. The other problem two, is the cage. I was told this cage was FD legal. I wasn't sure, and I went with the assumption that it wasn't and that changes would have to be made. It's not in the FD rule book exactly how you cage an aluminum chassis Corvette, because it's kind of an oddity. It's a kind of one-off scenario. So I was able to finally get that information, and this one is not done correctly. So you see all this extra bar work, which I would assume was extra bracing because they cut and re-weld. I don't know. But down here, you have this plate. So they're supposed to weld dowels into the frame so you don't crush the frame and you tighten bolts. Bolt the plate down and weld the down bars to the plate. But the way that's supposed to be done is the plate's supposed to be a piece of angle like this, or, you know, with the angle down here. And the cage bar is supposed to land on that. But what they did here was they welded this tube in for this bottom structure and then landed the down bar on that. Now the problem with that is the cage is too long with this crossbar to cut it here and weld it to a piece of angle. But if we had a piece of angle going the other way, we'd have to extend it, which you can't extend a piece of cage, especially the main hoop. So there's really no way to modify this cage and get it to fit FD rules without extensively modifying it. The front we could make work. They basically have this plate, they bent it on each end, notched it, welded the tube to it, and then landed this tube on that. But there's enough room to where I could cut this tube here and put a piece of angle here and weld it to that. It would be tricky, but it's doable. The other problem is these anti-intrusion bars. They go through and land on the frame rail. That's not FD legal either. Anti-intrusion bars are not supposed to go through the firewall. Let me show you how they're done on this car. Vets in general are kind of an oddity with this because they essentially already have anti-intrusion bars. The idea of that is, you know, in drifting, there's a lot of wheel-to-wheel contact. If your wheel breaks off, that it doesn't come through and just break your legs. So on this car, you already have that. You're already inside the frame rail. So they just have you add this steel plate here to brace the cage to the frame rail there. So that in this cage is all FD legal. So that was not such a big thing, and I wasn't super concerned about it because I'm not planning on doing FD right away. But if I would like to do FD, I don't really have the option without building another chassis. There's some other things I dislike about this cage. It's 1 3/4 inches. That other cage is 1.5 inches, so it's heavier than it needs to be. The main hoop's shoved pretty far forward. That down bar is in the way of the seat going back. There's a few things. Overall, it's a well-built cage. It's just, again, it's not gonna pass FD tech. So my idea was, all right, we'll finish this car, run it as is. I'm sure we'll wreck it, beat it up, use it as a learning platform, and then we'll try to get ourselves a steel chassis car, get it caged in the off season, and swap everything over. But just the other question marks associated with this car, I realized, you know, we're at the point now where it's gonna be not much more work to build that car from where it is than to build this car. We've got the engine out of it, we've got no plumbing in it. Really the only parts that are attached is the radiator, which unbolts from the roll cage, the fuel cell, which unbolts from the frame rails, the rear bash bar, the front bash bar, and the intercooler. Which all of that stuff will just unbolt, and we'll be able to perfectly swap this stuff over. So I just decided, you know, it's kind of now or never. If this is my long-term goal, to have a car that could be FD legal if I wanted it to, and I plan on reshelling into a steel chassis car that's easier to fix and easier to build, I might as well do it now. So, I mean, it's a bummer because it delays us. But as far as everything else goes, like, to me, it's not really that big of a deal because when I bought this car, I basically bought the engine and got all the other parts in the chassis for free. And it being an aluminum chassis, not being able to confirm if the cage was FD legal and not having eyes on the car myself, I banked on the chassis being worthless, you know, when I bought the car. If it was good and we didn't have to do anything or switch chassis like we're doing, that would have been great, but I didn't bank on that, and I never do when I buy an unfinished project. I always buy it for at most the sum of its parts. And this car still got us a huge head start. We were able to figure out a lot of things. It still was worth it. I definitely don't regret it. But it is gonna cost us a little more time. Kind of been sitting in a holding pattern waiting for this thing to be done and ready because we had to get it and so on and so forth. Luckily, We See Parts had this car. I hit them up just in the nick of time because I was looking for a steel chassis car. They had an aluminum carcass just like this for sale, but I didn't want another aluminum chassis because of the way you have to do the cage. You know, this one, you just land the cage right on the frame rail. Building stuff like the trans mount, I can just MIG weld tabs, boom, to the trans tunnel. I don't have to use that thick of material. It's a lot more complicated to do everything we need to do on that car, especially because we're converting to a front trans. We have to cut all this out. We're gonna have to add bracing, so on and so forth. So I was set on getting a steel chassis, but for whatever reason, steel chassis are a lot harder to find. You can find Z06 bare carcasses for sale all day long. For whatever reason, you can't really find steel chassis cars. So I hit him up, they're like, oh, we don't have any. And then he was like, hey man, I have this one, the front's been cut off it, but do you have a bash bar? I look, I'm like, dude, it's literally perfect. I'm gonna have to cut the front off it anyway. They were nice enough to pull it off, set it to the side for me. I had a guy pick it up and again, ship it straight to AJ's to get caged. So that all panned out, man. It was car probably runs like 16 second quarter miles. It panned out perfect. So huge shout out to them for working with me and getting the car, because you know I had to find a transporter and it was like during the snowstorms, and again, huge shout out to AJ for getting the cage done so quickly. Without those two people, this would not have been possible. You know, if we had to buy a complete chassis, strip it down to a carcass, deal with storing and selling all the parts, then get it caged from someone who's gonna take 2 months to cage it, like we wouldn't even have this. We wouldn't be here until Clutch Kicker started. So again, huge shout out to them. Wouldn't have been possible without them. Now again, yes, we are a little delayed. We might miss the first round, but we've got a backup plan. We're gonna put nitrous on the Miata if we have to. That thing will be plenty competitive with a 125 shot. So that's the backup plan, but we're still gonna push like crazy to get this build done in time. Because if we don't, then we'll be last minute rushing just to get it done for round 2. So we gotta push for round 1. Hopefully we can get it done. If not, you know, we're gonna take our time. I don't wanna do anything halfway. This is I don't ever plan on building another comp car. You know, maybe reshell if I totaled it, but this is it for me. Like, I'm doing everything I ever wanted to do in a comp car build now. So I wanna do it right. Moral of the story. So that was a whole lot of jibber jabber. Had to catch you guys up. This all kind of happened and it's like, okay, we got to make a decision. At that point, I'm like, it's not worth building this car. Putting so much time and effort into it, it's not worth building a car that's as questionable as it is. So luckily we made this happen. Now we do have a road ahead of us. So this thing is a bare carcass, but we still got a lot of parts to get out of here. It does still have the stock column setup, so if we retain this, we could put that back in and run Pro Spec if we wanted. For now, we're gonna do aftermarket column pedal box, but more on that later. What we need to do right now is get the rest of the parts stripped off this thing, make it a bare carcass, because we can take advantage of that and paint the cage and paint the inside of the car since it's completely stripped before we start cannibalizing that car, taking all the parts off it, putting it on this car. So, throat's sore. That was a lot of talking. Enough jibber jabber. Let's get to work. Well, I wanted to save that in case we were able to retain the stock pedals, but getting this out with the dash bar here was just not happening. So we had to destroy it. This is a really elaborate setup, and this is why FD's rule on no pedal boxes and stuff is silly, because in a car like this, look at how complicated this is. This whole bracket deal goes all the way back there, and the only way to get that out, I mean, I think we could have maybe got it out if we took that motor off, but very difficult to get out with that bar in there. Moral of the story, it's a very complicated setup. If you ever needed to change a pedal or something. So anyway, keep trucking. everywhere. I think there's just a couple more bolts back there that you gotta get to, and the whole assembly comes off. Oh. All right, well, we got this thing pretty well fully stripped down. We got to get the lines and stuff out of the trans tunnel, but we'll do that when it's not sitting on the trailer on a pallet. Getting this thing off of here is going to be a whole other ordeal, but we've got a good amount done. We've got all the stuff stripped out of the chassis. We got it all cleaned out, looking nice and fresh. Osfoed the cage to keep it from rusting until we paint it, because we are going to be painting the cage as well as the whole chassis. It won't take a ton of time to do it since it's already stripped, and I know I'll regret not doing it later. So we're gonna do the cage one color, the whole chassis another color. It should come out pretty sick. Now, this is one of those things where we are in a time crunch, and we really shouldn't be doing this. We wanna get it done in time, but I'm building this car for myself for the years to come. This car is my end game when it comes to competition drift cars. I don't plan on building another car in a couple years. Like, for me, this is it, you know? Yeah, sure, if we wreck it, obviously we'll have to reshell it into another car, but I don't plan on changing chassis or anything. Like, I'm building this car to be everything I'd ever want a competition drift car to be, and to be able to grow with it. You know, we can continue running clutch kickers and these other shootouts, you know, and we could go all the way up to Pro 1 with this car if we want to. That's the goal. So it's one of those things, as much as it sucks to maybe delay us, miss around, I'd rather miss around and have the car done right the first time. So jibber jabber, point is, I've got all the paint stuff. We're about ready to start painting, but we do have a little more cutting to do first. So we need to cut this rear section out. I'm not sure how much. We're gonna start with, you know, cutting it around here, leave the wheel tubs and see what that looks like. This car already had the wheel tubs cut out of it, so it's got nothing back here, which pros and cons to both. The only negative is it's gonna fill up with tire smoke in here. And I guess if you blew up a tire, you know, there's a lot of stuff to get smacked around in here. But the benefit is you can get to all the suspension stuff really easily. So not sure exactly how far we're gonna cut there. And then we also need to cut the trans tunnel out. Now this is gonna be tricky. Getting the top cut out, that's not a big deal, but getting the bracing down here cut out, not gonna be very fun without a lift. But we need to knock out those two things before we go painting the chassis. So plenty more work to do, but now that we finally have this car here, it's time to go full force, full tilt at it and get this thing done. So we should just be hammering out projects on this thing for the foreseeable future. We got a ton of parts here, ton of work to do. It's just time to put the legwork in. So I hope to see you guys for all of that. But for now, that's gonna be a wrap. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.